Have you ever felt like your life is filled with potential, but something invisible is holding you back? You want to grow. You want to build something real. But no matter how much you dream, you stay stuck in the same loop, hesitating, avoiding, delaying. It's not that you're lazy. It's not that you don't care. Deep down, you know there's more in you. So what's stopping you? Carl Jung had an answer. He called it Puer Aeternus, the eternal child. At first, it sounds beautiful. This inner child represents freedom, play, creativity, the dreamer inside you. But here's the twist. That same dreamer can quietly sabotage your growth, because behind the light, there's a shadow, a part of you that fears structure, that resists responsibility, that chooses escape over evolution. So here's the real question. Why do so many gifted people avoid growing up? And how do you break free without killing your spirit? Because what lifts you may also be what keeps you small. And it's time you see both, the eternal child and the hidden war within. Carl Jung called it Puer Aeternus, the eternal child. Not the child of innocence, but the one who refuses to grow. This archetype lives in many of us. It's the dreamer, the wanderer, the one who longs for freedom, inspiration, and endless possibility. At first glance, it seems harmless, even beautiful. It fuels creativity. It keeps life feeling open, exciting, untamed. But beneath the surface, a hidden war is taking place. Inside, two forces are in constant tension. One part of you dreams boldly, while another avoids structure, discipline, and responsibility. You chase vision, yet fear commitment. You crave freedom, yet feel unanchored. You want to build, yet resist the weight of consistency. This is the shadow of the eternal child. And it's not just a phase. It's a psychic pattern that, when left unchecked, becomes a trap. In the modern world, this archetype thrives. We glorify youth. We romanticize rebellion. We escape into digital fantasy, endless options, dopamine hits. But the cost is high. People stuck in the grip of the eternal child often feel lost, unfulfilled, trapped in cycles of short-term excitement, followed by long-term emptiness. They jump from one thing to the next, from project to project, from relationship to relationship, but never land, never root, never finish. Over time, something deeper begins to erode a sense of inner wholeness, a trust in oneself, a clarity of purpose. Because without commitment, we lose coherence. And without coherence, we lose the ability to build anything meaningful. Jung warned us, the eternal child, left unconfronted, can lead to a quiet, lifelong dissatisfaction. Not the dramatic kind, but the kind that slowly eats at the edges of your life. This is not about becoming rigid or dull. It's about integrating the dreamer with the adult, the creative spark, with grounded presence. Until that happens, the inner war never stops, and your potential remains just that potential. But the eternal child is only half the story. What happens when this archetype becomes a prison, not a spark? Why the modern world feeds the child man Carl Jung warned us. We live in a culture that worships youth, not just in age, but in mindset. Spontaneity is praised, commitment is delayed, and responsibility is treated like a burden, not a virtue. In this environment, The Puer Aeternus thrives. It's not just a personal pattern, it's a cultural epidemic. We are living through what could be called a collective adolescence, one where novelty is mistaken for progress, and escape is celebrated as freedom. Think about it. We scroll through dopamine loops, chasing excitement while avoiding discomfort. We are trained to seek validation in hearts and views, but taught almost nothing about resilience, patience, or purpose. Social media accelerates this split. It rewards the image of movement, not the reality of mastery. It glorifies the start of a journey, but says little about what it takes to stay. And this digital age doesn't just reflect the eternal child, it reinforces it. We are constantly sold the idea that we can live without consequence. Swipe for love, click for success, post for approval. But this illusion is costly. The longer we stay in the fantasy, the harder it becomes to face reality. This is how a whole generation can feel paralyzed, so much potential, but no momentum. So many options, but no direction. And it's not laziness. It's overstimulation without integration. We're drowning in vision, but starving in execution. The world has extended adolescence indefinitely. College turns into gap years. Careers turn into side hustles. Commitments turn into maybes. All while a quiet ache grows inside a hunger for something real, something rooted, something earned. Jung saw this coming. He understood that the child man is not evil or broken. He is disoriented. He has no map. And without a clear initiation into maturity, he drifts. But this isn't a condemnation. It's a call. Because the same culture that feeds the eternal child is starving for true adults. Men and women who can dream but also lead, who can imagine but also endure. But to break this pattern, we must go deeper than culture. We must face the myths that shape our mind. Icarus, the dreamer who fell. The myth of Icarus is more than a cautionary tale. It's a psychological mirror, one that reflects the deepest tension inside the Puer Aeternus. Icarus was gifted wings, a dreamer, lifted by vision, but intoxicated by the thrill of flight. He ignored the laws of gravity and fell. In Jungian terms, Icarus is the eternal child, creative, imaginative, bold, yet blind to consequence. He craved freedom, but misunderstood its limits. And in that confusion, he crashed. Today, this archetype plays out in quieter, more familiar ways. Not through myth, but through lives full of potential, scattered by lack of direction. People who chase the high of possibility, but never build the muscles of discipline. They burn bright, then burn out. Because raw ambition without structure is a setup for collapse. In symbolic psychology, this is the cost of idealizing freedom. When liberty is pursued without grounding, it becomes its own form of prison. We convince ourselves that limitation is the enemy, that roots will kill our wings. But Jung warned us, unconscious fantasies become destructive when left unchecked. The illusion whispers, stay light, stay open, stay free. But the body grows tired. The soul begins to ache. And beneath the surface, burnout creeps in, not because we aimed too high, but because we had no framework to hold the flight. Icarus represents the unbalanced dreamer, someone who reaches for the divine without respecting the laws of the earth. And this is not just about ambition, it's about identity. Those trapped in the eternal child archetype often build their sense of self around potential, not action, around vision, but not embodiment. So they fear structure. They resist responsibility. And when life asks them to choose, to commit, to focus, they interpret it as death. A death of freedom, a death of self. But that's the illusion, because the opposite is true. It's not structure that kills the dream, it's lack of integration that drains it away. And to walk that path, we must go inward into the shadow, into the resistance, into the self. The path of integration making the child. Whole Carl Jung believed that the journey toward psychological wholeness, what he called individuation, is not about silencing the eternal child, but transforming it. The Puer Aeternus is not a flaw. It's a fragment of your psyche that carries immense energy, raw, untamed, and bursting with possibility. But until it's integrated, it remains scattered and volatile. Individuation is the process of giving this energy direction. It begins not with suppression, but with conversation. Jung encouraged us to enter into inner dialogue with the child within, to listen to its dreams without letting them dominate, to honor its fears without surrendering to them. But insight alone isn't enough. Transformation requires shadow work. The shadow is the unconscious side of the puer, the part that avoids responsibility, resents structure, and fears intimacy. To face it, we must look inward with radical honesty. This is where journaling becomes a powerful mirror. Write what you run from, what you crave but never pursue, what patterns keep repeating, and why. In these pages, illusion crack. Truth emerges. Mindfulness is the second tool. The eternal child reacts. It flees discomfort. It seeks constant novelty. But the mindful adult pauses, observes the craving, and chooses a grounded response. This inner practice builds something subtle but essential self-trust. And self-trust is what the eternal child lacks. Not because it is weak, but because it was never taught to stay, to commit, to finish. Integration is not a single breakthrough. It's the accumulation of small, decisive actions done consistently over time. You don't need to revolutionize your life overnight. You need to show up for one goal, one discipline, one promise to yourself again and again. Each fulfilled action restructures the ego. Each commitment creates new psychological architecture. And slowly, the eternal child learns to stay. What emerges is a self no longer at war, not a rigid adult, nor a reckless dreamer, but a synthesis, a self capable of dreaming with clarity and building with purpose. But one cannot individuate in isolation. The child must learn to love, not just freedom, but connection, intimacy, fear, and the wound of the child. He wants love, but runs from it. He craves connection, but pulls away the moment it gets real. Not because he's heartless, but because somewhere, a long time ago, he learned that closeness comes with a price. Carl Jung called this the wound of the Puer Aeternus, the eternal child. The part of us that fears intimacy, not because we don't desire it, but because we associate it with losing ourselves. You see, to the child man, love feels like surrender. Commitment feels like a cage, and vulnerability, it feels like danger. So he becomes the escape artist. Charming, curious, spontaneous, but always with one foot out the door. Relationships stay shallow because depth demands presence, and presence feels like sacrifice. Psychologists call this emotional avoidance. The nervous system sees closeness as threat, not because it is, but because once it was. And here's the paradox. What he runs from is also what could heal him. Because intimacy, real intimacy, is not the loss of freedom. It's the foundation of it. In true connection, you don't disappear. You expand. The right relationship doesn't cage your spirit. It reflects it back to you. Clearer, stronger, sane. But that only happens when you stop performing and start revealing. When you stop asking, will they still want me if I show who I am, and start saying, this is me, fully, calmly, no apology. Vulnerability isn't weakness. It's ownership. It says I'm not hiding anymore, but I'm not handing myself over either. This is the middle ground the eternal child must find, to stop chasing fantasy and start building something real. To learn that true love is not about escaping, but about staying present, staying honest, staying grounded, even when your old wiring tells you to run. Because that's where healing happens, not in intensity, but in consistency. And as the child learns to stay, to trust, to open, he begins to mature, still full of wonder, still alive with imagination, still wild, still wondering, but finally willing to stay. And yet, this is not the final challenge. Because beyond intimacy lies the last threshold, transforming dreams into grounded power. That's what comes next. True adulthood discipline as liberation. Real adulthood begins when we stop chasing freedom and start building it. To Carl Jung, this is the essence of individuation, the union of opposites, the merging of what feels contradictory imagination and structure, freedom and form, dream and discipline. He taught that maturity doesn't mean killing the inner child. It means creating the container strong enough to hold its wildness. Think of the artist who paints every day, not only when they feel inspired, the entrepreneur who honors vision but meets it with consistency, the musician who rehearses for hours, not because they love repetition, but because they respect the gift. This is what Jung meant. True power doesn't silence the dreamer. It gives the dreamer scaffolding. Without that, the child runs in circles. Ideas spark, but never catch. Energy bursts, but quickly fades. Discipline, then, isn't the enemy of freedom. It's what makes freedom sustainable. Without roots, even the most beautiful tree will fall in the wind. But here's what most people miss. Discipline isn't punishment. It's alignment. When you act in service of a deeper purpose, when you keep promises to yourself, when you hold your vision steady, you stop feeling like a slave to external forces. You become the architect of your own life. And that shift changes everything. No more waking up lost. No more chasing highs and crashing after. No more waiting for the right feeling to begin. You create rhythm. You build momentum. And eventually, you become reliable to yourself. That's what adulthood really is. Not paying bills or following rules, but becoming someone you can count on when things get hard. Someone who shows up. Someone who finishes. Someone whose freedom was earned through grounded effort. Because dreams that stay private die quietly, but dreams that touch the ground become culture. So Jung's call is not to abandon the spark, but to anchor it, to build the rituals, routines, and standards that protect your highest potential from being wasted. This is where the child becomes a creator, not just of ideas, but of legacies. And yet, this transformation isn't just personal, because the mature individual doesn't only liberate themselves, they become a stabilizing force for everyone around them. And that's where we go next. Personal growth as a cultural revolution. The eternal child is not just a personal dilemma. It's a mirror of something much larger, a crisis of maturity across our culture. We live in an age of distractions, where illusions are sold as lifestyles, and perpetual adolescence is normalized. Responsibility is mocked. Discipline is labeled toxic, and emotional depth is traded for momentary dopamine hits. But Jung saw this coming. He warned that without conscious integration, societies begin to mirror the individuals within them. A culture that avoids inner work becomes a culture that avoids truth. That's why healing isn't selfish. It's revolutionary. Every time you step out of avoidance, every time you face your fears, every time you commit to something real, you push against a tide that numbs the collective soul. You show others that maturity doesn't mean repression, it means wholeness. You become evidence that growth is possible without losing wonder. That responsibility can walk hand in hand with creativity, freedom, and love. This is what Jung hinted at in his idea of collective individuation. That it's not enough for one person to grow in isolation, that the transformation of the world begins with the transformation of individuals, but it does not end there. Because healthy individuals become anchors. They ripple outward. They raise children with depth. They build communities with integrity. They shape institutions that reflect soul, not just structure. This is the cultural revolution. No one talks about the quiet rebellion of those who choose depth over distraction, integration over escape, truth over fantasy. And perhaps we're already seeing the signs. A new generation, weary of pretending, disillusioned with curated perfection, hungry for substance, for meaning, for something real. It won't happen overnight, but every act of personal accountability is a vote for a better world. Every healed wound becomes a doorway for someone else. Every time you stop escaping and start engaging, you shift the collective field just a little. So, if you've done the work, or if you're just beginning, know this: you are not just helping yourself, you are breaking a cycle. You are planting something for those who come after you. And now, having walked with the child in the shadow, it's time for the final turn. The lesson that brings it all home. The last door, a life worth. Living true growth is not the death of the child. It's the moment the child finally meets the adult and they walk forward as one. This is the real alchemy. Not turning metal into gold, but transforming chaos into purpose, launching into direction, dreams into form. The eternal child gave you wings, but the adult gives you ground, and between the two you learn to fly on your own terms. Jung called this integration, a sacred union of opposites. Not a perfect life, but a meaningful one. Because real freedom is not about escaping responsibility. It's choosing it with intention. It's waking up and saying, "This is the life I will shape. This is the vision I will build." From dreamer to doer, from boy to builder, from longing to living. And now, The last question is yours. What will you do with the gold you've forged within? There's no more map to follow. Only the path your feet are now ready to create.